Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Lowenstein, and thank you, Wendy, for such a lovely introduction. I hope I can deliver on such a on such a great intro. So today I'm going to be talking to y'all about girlhood, and then we're going to have a really great discussion with some visionaries and leaders in this space. And what we're going to talk about in this talk about girlhood is girl culture. So bear with me for about 15 minutes. I'm going to go pretty fast and heavy hitting with a bunch of content at you, and then we'll get into the panel discussion shortly thereafter. So before we get into the presentation, y'all have to answer a question. And my question is, do you know the rules of the internet? You're all decent human beings. I'm assuming you don't, and I swear, I really promise it's for good reason that you don't know about this. The rules of the internet were a guide for web etiquette, first appearing on 4chan's Random forum. Random was where very early memes were born. It's also where the hacktivist group Anonymous came from. Hence, Rule 3, we are anonymous. You've probably heard of Rule 34. If it exists, there's pornography of it. But what you haven't heard of, I'm sure, is my favorite rule, which is Rule 30. There are no girls on the internet. Now, opinions vary on what the meaning of Rule 30 was. Some people say that it was innocuous and merely suggesting that early web experiences were mostly designed for men. Other people say that it was reflecting a resentment amongst some of these guys about how they thought women use their gender in the real world and that gender should not matter and the so-called egalitarian nature of the web. But I think the most telling reason for Rule 30 was that a faceless, nameless avatar in cyberspace defaulted to that of men because culture setting defaulted to that of men as well. And given that the earliest internet ads literally had messages like, unleash the power of the web by doing your taxes and checking sports scores and discussing those sports scores with other dudes and talking about what all men apparently secretly discuss, which is Egyptian literature. This is a real ad, by the way, I didn't make this up. Perhaps it is indeed true that the early internet was not designed for women. And that's because if there's one constant in culture across geographical lines and ideological lines, it's the devaluation of femme creativity. For example, it's why most of the world's cooking is done by women, but most of the world's chefs are men. It's also why VC funding for women's startups has gone from dismal to destitute. Since 2017, there's been a year-on-year decline in the investment into women's projects, which frankly doesn't really make sense because women's startups generate 2 times more ROI than ones founded by men. And if you dive into these numbers for women of color, the numbers are even more depressing. Now, happily, that devaluation in culture is being challenged by what experts are calling, and by experts, I do mean the girlies, a season of girlhood. We have Taylor Swift and Beyonce breaking pretty much every record in the music industry, Taylor creating the world's first billion-dollar tour, Beyonce causing global rises to inflation when she merely announced the Renaissance tour in Europe, and the Barbie movie, which I don't need to tell you has no shortage of accolades behind it today. It is the top grossing Warner Brothers film of all time. But there's also been this unaccounted impact of just the color pink in culture and things like Barbie core on retailer bottom lines. Now, this season of girlhood is a culmination of pockets of culture changing the definition of girl altogether. So now it's less of a noun and it's more of an adjective. So we have, we have girl dinner, we have hot girl walk, we have hot girl summer, we have girl math, we have tomato girl summer, my personal favorite, feral girl fall. The list goes on. And the idea of girl as a descriptor, it opens up all of the doors of the multiplied expressions of girlhood, rather than the very singular framing of what it means to be a woman and a girl. And this idea of girlhood and girl culture, it's much more cultural than anything. It actually doesn't have anything to do with gender or even age. So a term that's historically been used to marginalize or exclude is now being reclaimed to celebrate identity. But I think perhaps most of all, this season of girlhood that we're seeing is perhaps a reflection and a reaction to seeing that being an empowered girl boss is not going to save you from the fate of being a woman today. And when you don't have a narrative of the future, you look to narratives of the past, right? Girlhood is almost this like comfortable draw and a draw in the comfort of the familiar, a time when you were free to play with different expressions and identities without the pressure of picking just one. But very quickly, women and girls are told to relinquish their girl culture interests lest we be deemed frivolous or disempowering to ourselves. When the equivalent for men, escapist media like the MCU or video games, that's never labeled as frivolous or disempowering. It's just part of the zeitgeist. So while the season of girlhood might be new, the relegation of girl interests as trivial, which obviously has a significant impact on their self-esteem, that's been happening for millennia. Take the Beatles. They were not popular until teenage girls made them cool, but we called teenage girls hysterical for loving them, and men who love the Beatles simply have good taste. Or more recently, Swifties being labeled for being in a cult for attending their stadium concerts and movie theater experiences because obviously cosplaying in your fan gear, building a community around something that you love, and being like maybe cringeworthy emotional about your fandoms, your arts, your communities is totally just exclusive to things that girls like. But just like any community for men, girlhood is also a community. It's fandom, it's friendships, it's inside jokes, it transcends generations, and that makes it valuable cultural currency. Or, as Jessica Hopper noted, replace fangirl with expert. Because it was actually teenage girls who concepted the whole idea of fandom in the first place, and they built fandom into the social force that it is today on platforms that have been almost universally run and designed by men who have rarely had the interests of women and girls in their business operations. And it was actually women and girls who first figured out how to monetize those platforms in the first place. Taylor Lorenz notes this in her book, but it was actually mommy bloggers who first created the idea of influencing by sharing their experiences with postpartum depression. But if the response to the Barbie movie and insert anything else that women create in culture is any indication, and just putting aside the Beyonce, Taylor, and Barbie of it all for a second, things that women create are still being degraded, derided, and now actively disappearing from culture. Just take the media industry, for example. Women's owned media has shut down at such an alarming rate in the last 3 years. It now makes up less than 1% of our global paid media investment. Or the fact that we are almost the entirety of the creator economy, but we still get paid less than our male counterparts. And now we are being erased from that economy that we created to begin with. This is Ayatana. She is one of hundreds of AI influencers. And Ayatana's technologists, who are men, created her because they, quote, did not want to work with real women who have egos, manias, or just want to make a lot of money. Wow. Despite the fact that they make tens of thousands of dollars off of her woman likeness every single month. And that brings me back to Rule 30. There are no girls on the internet. I think early as it was in the internet, Rule 30 reveals a social truth about women, which is that we live in a contradictory culture where we are simultaneously admired for being women and vilified for being women. Just think of all of the words that we have in culture to articulate our dislike for women, usually when they are just expressing some of their girl culture interests. And this rise of girlhood as a subculture is a response to the truth found in both of those statements, and it asks, why would we break the glass ceiling in Ken's Modo Dojo Casa house when instead we can just architect the Barbie dream house? So let's bring all of this together. With the historical devaluation of femme creativity, to girl becoming an adjective, to the expertise found in girl culture could lead us to a future where maybe eventually we find ourselves where girlhood establishes its own cultural universe and shatters the restraints that have relegated it as trivial or secondary. And obviously, brands being arbiters of culture, we have a significant role in this, right? In advertising, historically, women have been objectified, but much more recently, we've been empowered, told to be strong or courageous or bold. But in doing so, brands and by proxy culture get to remain unexamined, and it's women who need to change. Or as Jane Cunningham noted in her book, All About This Topic, brands need to stop telling women how to be and start being in service to them. Because yes, I'm sure a lot of people would argue, well, most brands do speak to women, And that is certainly true, but very few actually invest in them and their cultures, their arts, their communities, their fandoms, and their interests. And still, I think marketers are remained entirely focused on the wrong points. There's been a lot of conversation using terms like the she economy or the female dollar. And I think this language implies that women's interests are being deemed not serious enough for true economic consideration. Just take the very infrastructure of the media and entertainment industry, which still largely caters to men's interests. There simply is not the equivalent infrastructure for women at scale. Although I will note that we are happily starting to see that somewhat change in the world of women's sports today. Now, Mr. Serena Williams and Reddit's founder knows this very well. It's why he's the leading investor in women's sports today, and he calls its underinvestment a, quote, legacy of gross business incompetence. Now, earnest investment into girl culture in service of brand growth and women's self-esteem, it can look like a lot of things. On the more serious end of the scale, it can obviously look like solving material issues for women and girls in your category. But it also doesn't like have to be that serious. The brands that are part of building this Barbie dream house are just the ones who are listening to the demands of girl culture. Are y'all familiar with water cup company Stanley? Most people, yes, cool. I'm a Stanley girl myself. So Stanley used to market in a very gendered tone for men, and they've grown by almost 300% in the last year by keeping the core function of their products the same, but just releasing femme colorways, working with a few key influencers and girl spaces, and without the brand ever having to make any ridiculous claims that their water cups are gendered. Girl culture did all of the work for them, and thus the Stanley girl was born. Still, very few brands have the equity or the products to go this alone. The ever-evolving trends of the girl internet almost demand that brand-to-brand partnerships need to become part of your marketing mix. Hunt's Tomatoes, for example, a brand that has not even an ounce of equity with the girlies, but US retailer Lisa Says God does. And last summer, they released a Tomato Girl Summer partnership that sold out within minutes. Or Popeyes and DoorDash in the United States releasing girl dinner menus that require them not to change their product assortment, but just update their media messages. So the rise of girl culture across fandoms, geographies, and identities, I think, is a reflection and a opportunity for brand creativity for the exact same reason that our industry is so obsessed with generative AI. Generative AI learns and references upon itself, same as girl culture does. But there will never be a future where generative AI could concept making seemingly ranch the most unhinged moment on the internet last year, or thinking to ask men how often they think about the Roman Empire. And try as they might, the NFL did not make 61% more women tune in to watch a game with better data or better AI. Taylor, as benevolent as she is putting niche brands like the NFL on the map, and the NFL has not shied away from this. They are making investing in girl culture their entire personality, and it is paying them in dividends. But it's AI and not girl culture that every marketer at this festival is scrambling to figure out, how will this affect my business? So is AI just easier to understand than girl culture? Or do we just value girlhood so little? And you can say this about any subculture, not just girl culture, but even the most advanced AI today is still really bad at understanding identity-based nuance. So for that reason, in this future, girl culture could be a shield to the threat of AI on creativity because of how it remixes itself in a way that could never be predictable. And obviously, you could scale that statement across to other subcultures as well. Second, the trend we're starting to see where women and girls are going to digital campfires and non-algorithmic media spaces, I think we will start to see that fragment even further because of the lack of investment into women's safety online, which candidly I think is a huge opportunity for brands. And finally, brands begin to mimic girl culture as the greatest experts in modern marketing. And what I mean by that is perhaps the future of marketing is to be found in not just investing in these girl culture spaces, but also acting like the women who created it. So first, it is no longer sufficient for brands just to have customers to grow, right? You need fans, and fans are built from a shared identity of things that you love. But that shared identity is balanced with an emphasis on plurality. For example, in the Swiftum alone, I am indeed a Swiftie if you couldn't tell from this presentation, there are Black Swifties, there are gay Swifties, there are Hetlers. Taylor's largest fan base is actually in Indonesia. So the future of marketing hinges on brands remixing themselves to cater to the diversity of people while keeping their core community identity intact. A future where we have no prescriptive ideals, not telling people how to be, what they need. And that means actively investing in communities and not just blasting inefficient messages at them. And that community is about being almost annoyingly excited about something. To survive, brands need people who are going to obsess over every social, commercial, and cultural articulation of their image. And the very best marketing is simple. It gets you excited. And nobody gets more excited about something that they love than the girlies. And those four tenets of girl culture are exactly what brands need to do to actually make this future a reality where girl culture is taken seriously. So, first, for community and shared identity, think about the fandoms, the girl spaces online that are most relevant to your brands. Our teams personally run fandom workshops for brands, so that could be something that you think about with your own agency teams or your own internal teams. Once you've identified those girl communities that you need to be aligned with, maybe toss out this idea of a woman's targeted campaign and instead adopt the plurality of girl by aligning with these community spaces. Next, not having prescriptive ideals. I think a lot of mass reach marketing campaigns actually just default to a masculine monoculture. And instead, we need to supplement that by investing intentionally into women created culture in our media and marketing plans. And finally, do not shy away from the emotion and excitement found on the girl internet as a way to build your brand beyond a static identity. But my final and perhaps most important thought in this entire piece is rather than chasing digital fads that probably require you to have very expensive strategies behind them, perhaps instead it might be more beneficial for brands to first ask themselves if they just need to better understand women first. So with that, I'm going to close out now, and I'm going to invite up my esteemed panelists who are experts in this topic of girl culture so we can discuss a little bit more. All right, so why don't I have my brilliant panelists introduce themselves before we get into the discussion, and I'll let them introduce themselves so they can speak on their own behalf.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Huang, and I am an award-winning concert pianist and brand marketer. I moved to the US at the age of 17 to study music from China. And quickly, I made a name for myself as an international concert pianist and performed in over 10 countries in 4 continents. And what I quickly realized was that I wanted to make bigger impact. And the way to do so is to combine business and creativity. That's why I decided to transition my career into marketing. And when I was making that big career transition, I quickly, again, realized that it was really hard because people in the business world did not understand where I'm coming from, what kind of skills I could bring to the table, and what kind of unique perspective I could provide. That's how I decided to build a personal brand. And just like how anyone would build a Fortune 500 business, I built a personal board of trustees, and I built a strong and trusted personal brand, both digitally and in person. So fast forward, last year, I became the first ever director of B2B brand marketing at USA Today Network. Thank you. And it has been quite an exciting ride and quite an honor, as you can imagine. USA Today Network is the largest news publisher in the US and most trusted publisher in the US that reach half of the American adults. So that's a quick summary about who I am and my background.
Hello, everyone. I am Aayati Dashkar. I am the youth lead for World Women Foundation, and I actually am here to pre-release my second book, See It, Do It, and Be It, which is about inspiring young girls and women. It's mostly for young audiences. It's a workbook, and it empowers them to go for their dreams and ambitions. I'm also the founder of the Queendom Metaverse. I'm a self-taught artist as well. So let's talk about my Queendom Metaverse. My Queendom Metaverse really gives access to young girls, to coaching capital, community, all of that. And it's an online platform. And my Queendom Art series has found a place in the Martin Luther King House and the Maya Angelou House in the US. So thank you.
I feel wholly unaccomplished sitting next to you right now. So you have a very bright future ahead of you and a very bright present. So let's start talking about the Queendom Metaverse project first. So, in my talk, I talked about the lack of investment into women's media spaces, how women are going more to these like fragmented kind of digital closed campfires. Can you talk about why you wanted to create Queendom Metaverse? What was your hope for it, and really the project as a whole as it stands today?
So I think first, let me just start with this. Girls' abuse and discrimination can remain is unrecognized, and it can remain unrecognized, but we need to realize it still exists. Girls' stereotyping remains unrecognized, but it still exists. And I felt that's why Queendom needs to exist, to be able to give young girls this opportunity to feel like the problems that they face, the problems that they are facing real time, they don't feel unheard, right? That's the entire point of Queendom. And I really don't know if this is going to be successful or not. I don't even care if it's successful or not, because I do know it's going to give hope to young girls who have become refugees, have become misplaced because of war and climate change, have just become refugees. I bet they don't want to be seen as refugees. They want to be seen as normal human beings. And that affects mental health, talking about girls and girlification. And coming to that, I think queendom and girlification, this phenomena of girlhood, it is not about selling products, right? It's not about marketing. It's not about strategies. It's not about creating the money. It's not about filling your own pocket, right? It's about standing in solidarity with girls. It's about creating what is necessary for them. And my goals for Queendom. So Queendom is an online platform, but for 10 girls between 10 to 18, access to coaching, capital, community, creativity, commerce opportunities. It's a metaverse platform. And my goal for Queendom is not for it to become successful, but for girls to come to this metaverse, to be able to access corporations and brands and be able to ask help and showcase their talent and just be who they are. I think that's my goals for Queendom.
Amen. You are so brilliant, and I love everything that you are doing with Queendom. We'll loop back a little bit more on that in a moment. But Jenny, I talked in the girlhood talk about the plurality of women and how this movement of girlhood really embraces the plurality that women have in their lives, and that we aren't these like singular static beings, but we have so much in our lives that we love and celebrate, and that doesn't really reflect in culture or certainly in marketing at all. You exemplify plurality to me. Your whole career has been built off of being so dynamic. You are a leading marketer, you're a pianist, you're an advocate, you're a speaker. You are many things that I'm not even enlisting in that list just now. But I would love to hear from you about how you got to that point where you felt confident enough to show up wholly in professional spaces. I think women, especially, are told to tone it down, don't be too much, stick to the script, whatever it is. And I would love to hear from you how you've been able to do that so masterfully and shatter these stereotypes about what a professional woman should look like and act like, and how that's really reshaped your self-esteem.
Thank you, Rachel. That was a great question. As I mentioned earlier, when I first transitioned into the business world, it was really hard because no one understands where I'm coming from, what kind of skills I bring to the back table, even though I believe and I fully convinced that being a concert pianist is going to make me a great marketer because there are so many transferable skills. For example, the discipline, the creativity, the storytelling. But how do I bring all of that together to reinvent a new Jenny, to reinvent a new Jenny and to tell a story that everyone understands from different industry? So that's why what I was talking about personal branding earlier, that you have to think about what's your strength, what's your unique offering, and to really bring those together and create story that really resonate with people and to build a personal brand. There's nothing more important than building a personal brand and building for yourself than building other companies. So first of all, that's very important. And when I did that, when I first starting to building a personal brand of combining my background as a pianist and now I'm in marketing, it was really risky. And honestly, not many people was doing that. I decided to take a risk, even though I know I might fail, but I believe it strongly enough because I see there is a need in the business industry for people who has different background, coming from different industry, who has different perspective to offer. That those stories haven't been told enough, and I see a need there. So that's why I decided to take a risk and retell my story and really build a full career, full different from different channel that show up authentically, not just oh I'm a marketer, but completely eliminate my experience as a pianist. And that surprisingly turns out worked out really well. And the past 2 years, I've been named the Inspiring Woman by Campaign magazine and the Global Rising Star by the Ad Age. These are the most prestigious publications in the advertising industry. And that's how, when the industry, that's how I realized that industry is, even our industry is looking for something like this. The industry is helping me. We are working together to push for people, anyone who has a diverse background, and whether it's culturally or racially, or whether they are women or women of color, and so on. Last but not least, self-esteem. And I do believe that having self-esteem is so important for women. And if it wasn't because that I believe in myself so much, I wouldn't be taking that risk and really so determined to tell my story to the business world, to the marketing world. And this experience of reinvent myself, rebrand myself has definitely even increased my self-esteem even more. And that's how it works. And I think what I'm doing now is to try to inspire more women and more people coming from different backgrounds to pursue what they truly believe in and to tell their whole story, to not just show up as this one singular of who they are. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Jenny. Aayati, I would love to hear from you on the note of self-esteem. Can you talk about your book just a little bit, the book you're about to release? Because I would love to hear what inspired you to write it and if there's any kind of nuggets of insights you might want to share with the audience.
So, yes, of course. So, my book, See It, Do It, and Be It, I wrote it because I really saw that you cannot really control what girls hear, right? Girls can hear anything, it's trend, it's the internet, but you can control what girls see. The advertising companies are controlling everything, whatever you see on the billboard, and people are putting out so much information on the web. You choose what you want to see, right? And I think I wanted to put see it, be it, and do it because that is the process. You see something, you want to do it, and you want to be, and then you want to do it, right? You want to feel, you want to be in that position of power. And power is the only way. The earlier panelists said power is the only way to actually access equality, right? We all hold power. And I think I really wanted to write the book, See It, Do It, and Be It. It's also based on a film that World Women Foundation did. And I think that's why I wrote it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It sounds like an incredible book, and everyone should definitely buy it when it comes out. Awesome. And Jenny, final question for you before we start to wrap up. You talked about believing in yourself and having self-worth and self-esteem. Maybe can you give us some insights for the audience on how you arrived there? And the whole notion of girl culture and girlhood that I talked about is ultimately leaning into women just like stepping into their space and owning it, and not trying to break the glass ceiling in Ken's Modo Dojo Casa House anymore. And I would love to hear from you, like how you got there. Like, what was your process? Have you always been like that? Did you have mentors and advocates that helped you? I know for me, it's been a journey, and I would love to hear, as somebody who is so confident and stepped into their own power, how you arrived there.
Thank you, Rachel. I think a couple of different factors. One is personality-wise. I have a big personality, and I am very determined. If I want to do something, I will go ahead and do it, and regardless how difficult it is. But second, I am really fortunate to grow up with so many role models around me. Even though the small town I grew up in China is a completely different culture. It was very, very much male dominant, and very, very much that when girls receive good education is because they want to marry up. It's not because they want to be independent and to um, pursue what they care about. So I was fortunate that I grew up with role models, like people around me, my families. I'm a whole family of very strong, independent women. And then after I moved to the US, I have many more mentors, like building a whole personal board of trustees. Almost all of them are women. And these women are really leading the way. I'm really just standing on the shoulders of giants. And seeing that they have arrived there and they also gave me a hand when I needed is inspiring, and also makes me more reassured that this is the right thing to do and I have to also make it.
Thank you so much for that wisdom. We'll close it out with just one final and brief question for you. In 2 sentences or less, can you tell me what you think the future of girlhood is?
Okay. We are not objects for objectification. We are not products for popularization, nor are we girls to be girlified. We are girls, and that's enough.
Future of girlhood, this is a great question. I think a lot of businesses are now talking about girlhood, but it's not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's actually good for business. And that, I think that's the future of girlhood, is power. We have a lot of power. We need to support each other, and we also need to invite allies to join us and lift each other up. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for such wise and thoughtful words. I feel so grateful to have had this wonderful conversation with you. I'm going to invite Wendy up back now to transition us into our next session, but thank you all so much for the time.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.